Okay, hello, and thank you all for tuning in to yet another episode of the Professional Pricing Society podcast. My name is Terrence, and we do have an amazing discussion ahead of us. Joining me today is Griff Perry. He is the co-founder of a company called Meter, a metering and pricing engine that makes it easy for SaaS companies to deploy, manage, and optimize usage-based pricing. Griff and his co-founder, John Griffin, started Meter after building and selling a backend as service company for video games to AWS. Prior to launching Meter, Griffin held senior digital strategy and transformation roles at Sky. Griff, how you doing today?
Oh, I'm very good. It's lovely to be here.
Good, good. I'm glad that we're glad to have you. We're very interested in this conversation today, talking about pricing as a growth lever for SaaS companies. Let's just go ahead and just jump right into it. If you don't mind, kind of give us a little brief description of your background and where you kind of come from regarding the pricing world.
Sure. I mean, one thing I would say up front is I'm probably much less expert in pricing or pricing strategies than the majority of your audience. So what I consider myself to be is an expert in the tooling that allows you to deploy pricing strategies effectively and flexibly. But obviously, I've picked up a bit about pricing along the way. In terms of my background, I mean, I've sort of had a career of two parts. So the first part of my career, I worked in television, as you mentioned, in Sky. So Sky are the big pay TV player in the UK and in Europe. I did a variety of things, and I started off being a strategist, but because digital was happening, I ended up focusing on digital strategy, and that leaked into digital products. And so I became a product person there. Funnily enough, I mean, thinking back on it, I probably didn't think as much about pricing as I should have done about those products, which is possibly because Sky is a subscription business, and for the most part, the products that we were building were being bundled in with the core subscription. But I didn't really flex the pricing muscle then. But the second part of my career was the entrepreneurial part. So, like you mentioned, that my co-founder, who's also called Griffin, although it's his surname rather than his first name, we founded a company called GameSparks, and that was a cloud infrastructure business focused on the video game space, like you said. And we deployed usage. Well, obviously, we had to design our own pricing strategy. So that was my first real exposure to pricing, and we deployed a usage-based pricing strategy successfully in that business. But the reason we've gone on to found Meter is we experienced a lot of pain associated with that usage-based pricing model. It's both operational, but also go to market. And we felt those pain points really keenly. We really struggled with them. And then when we sold that business to AWS, we then worked our earn out at AWS. They're also a usage-based pricing business, albeit on a much bigger scale. And what we saw is that they had exactly the same pain points. And so that was the real spark when we started thinking about Meter. It's like, right, okay, if you're deploying usage-based pricing, it hurts in these ways, and there's something missing that needs to be created that helps sort of salve those hurts.
Sure. That makes complete sense. Now, thinking about your background in strategy and kind of going into the digital realm, now we're in 2023 in the world of pricing. Why do you think it's going to be a little bit more important for these type of companies to kind of hone in onto their pricing strategies moving forward in this year?
Because life is tougher.
Yeah.
I mean, we are operating in hard mode, but certainly harder mode. And our customers are software companies. And so life got hard for them for two reasons. So one is the general macroeconomic climate is tough, and all their customers are looking to cut costs, cut their cloth. And so that's tough. And at the same time, the funding environment for software companies has changed pretty radically in the past year. So, we've gone from a period of easy money, essentially, to the current situation where new funding is much harder to come by and much more difficult to justify.
Sure.
And so companies are thinking, how do I get by without fundraising? Or if they are committed to fundraising, the potential investors are looking much more at the fundamentals. And so for those two reasons, life is harder. And I think when life is harder, people look at pricing much more keenly because it's seen as a lever to optimize results in more difficult circumstances. So I think pricing is much more important now than it was last year.
Sure. And I think any, pricing professional can also agree in that sentiment. It's more important now than it seems like it ever has been. Now, for those who may not be aware, what exactly is usage-based pricing? How do we know it's right for our business? And are there any other type of strategies underneath usage-based pricing?
So every single person listening to this podcast understands usage-based pricing because it's absolutely fundamental to verticals like logistics or energy and utilities or telecoms. So the basics of usage-based pricing is you pay for what you consume.
Mm-hmm.
What's new for our business is its application to software. So software is traditionally, if you go back decades, been sold on the basis of it's been on an ownership model. You buy it. And then for the last 10, 15 years, it's been going through a subscription phase where you're basically you're paying a recurring fee for access. That's the core SaaS model. And what's happening now is businesses are adopting usage-based pricing, partly because they're imitating or responding to innovators in the market like AWS or Datadog or Snowflake, and partly because there are some fundamental trends which make usage-based pricing work better. And a lot of that is to do with automation, and a lot of that's to do with product-led growth. But yes, the fundamental part of it is you pay for what you use, and it's an alternative to paying for ownership or for access or by transaction or by outcome.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are also other pricing strategies outside of usage-based pricing that you may be aware of. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. And what's interesting about our business is that they're often used in combination.
Mm.
So at Meta, we the tailwind for our business is absolutely the growing adoption of usage-based pricing. I think it's gone from being used by sort of a third or so of software companies 3 years ago to almost 2/3 now. But it isn't; these aren't all extreme variations of usage-based pricing like AWS.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it is hybrid, where one of our customers is offering to their customers subscriptions, for example, but for the subscription you get an allowance of stuff, whatever it is, let's say API calls, and when you exceed that allowance, you're charged overages. That's an example of usage-based pricing. So it's there is a lot of complexity which we like.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Good. Okay. Now, in your expertise and in your tenure of strategy building, who do you think should be involved in developing a pricing strategy?
It's tricky, isn't it? and I think this is one of the reasons why people don't pull, or companies don't pull pricing as a lever that much.
Mm.
So if times are good, your pricing is roughly right, you don't touch it because any changes are painful.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of who needs to be involved, it takes a village. It is pretty much all the functions across the company. So it's definitely finance. It's definitely sales. It's definitely marketing. It's definitely product, and it's definitely engineering. And then for each of those areas, you actually got to consider sub-teams. So to give you an example, in finance, that's both sort of commercial finance or financial planning and analysis people who are thinking about the effects of change pricing and
Mm-hmm.
forecasting different revenue amounts. But then there's also a different constituency, which are the billing operations or the FinOps people who are responsible for actually calculating and sending invoices. So they're worried about the operational impact of pricing changes, and you get sort of similar sort of sub constituencies all the way down, and it's it's hard. And in our business at Meta, we're often dealing with quite large companies who are adopting different pricing strategy for the first time, and what they realize is that they're actually going through quite a significant general business transformation. It's not just about implementing pricing. They've actually got to change the way their teams work with each other and the tooling that they share. And it's not unusual for us to be in a room with two teams from a customer who've never spoken to each other before.
That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And they sort of introduce themselves and start laughing, and we go, oh, right, okay, so this is all they knew for you. The good news is that this is our meat and drink. We do this every day. So we can be quite helpful about sort of guiding them and orchestrating their efforts. But the underlying point is it involves a lot of different teams and learning a whole bunch of new tricks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can only imagine learning different trends or learning different aspects, every department or sector. Everyone, it's essentially it's going to take a village of a company in this regard to, I guess, develop a legitimate pricing strategy. And there also, you have to take into consideration as well the data that every department brings to the table. Like, how can data play an important role in this process overall as well?
Well, firstly, it's very important. So actually, we think of ourselves as a data company, but it's important. It's important for two reasons. So one is about design and one is about operationalizing. So on the design front, a constant pain point we see is people going, well, I've got some ideas about pricing, but I don't know which is the right one. And to answer the question, you've got to understand how customers are using your product, how they segment into different groups. And so you need to, like again, I'm sure that most people who listen to this podcast, the first thing you do is you collect data. Like, sure. What's going on? What do we know about what's going on? And then you find a way of testing it. So that's the data to fuel design. But then on the operationalizing side of things, this is probably more so of usage-based pricing than perhaps other pricing strategies. But information about or data about product usage and how much a customer is spending is valuable throughout the business. So you don't need it just to drive your billing. Your sales team will also need that information so that they can have informed conversations with the customers. They don't want to be ignorant of how much that customer is using and how much they're spending. And they need that information so they can time their conversations, because you really want to talk to a customer if their usage is spiking up or spiking down or approaching a threshold above which they might be throttled or charged overages. So that data about usage and spend is critical for the sales team. To give you another example, it'll also be very important to your product team, because in a usage-based scenario, pricing is actually part of the product. You can't send a customer an invoice with a single line item once a month. The end customer completely reasonably wants to know how much they're using and how that usage converts into spend at any given point through the billing cycle. It could be the second day of the month, it could be the 17th day of the month, but they need that information. So product teams want to basically create billing dashboards. And so they need the same information, which is being piped to the billing system and it's being piped to the sales team. So for usage-based businesses, usage and spend data is lifeblood. It needs to percolate throughout the org.
To have its full effect, which makes
to have its full effect. Otherwise, you're not really managing it effectively. It's a living beast, isn't it? You put out your pricing, but you need to actively manage your customers. You'll want to agree slightly different pricing terms for different customers depending on who they are, particularly if you've got slightly larger customers. And that information allows you to do it. It's if you're not being proactive, you're not optimizing. It's not something you can set and forget.
Sure. Last question for you. I want to shoot this in your direction, going away from our customers. What advice would you give to companies thinking about raising their prices? Especially in this year, 2023.
Oh, it's tricky, isn't it? Well, particularly in software, which is the vertical I operate in, a lot of people are doing it. I think there was news. There was news this week about Shopify put up their prices, Zoom put up their prices. and there's definitely a lot of supply side pressure to do it because input costs are going up. Plus, if you're looking to optimize results, you should be relatively bold about searching out the headroom in your pricing.
Sure.
But I'm not answering your question. I'm explaining why it's difficult, right? So how would I do it? I mean, for a start, I would really think about what your pricing power is. Some software vendors are effectively critical infrastructure. So, Meta's own business is pretty critical infrastructure. I mean, we're right at the core of billing customers. And the more critical you are, the more pricing power you have. At the other end of the scale, if you're just a nice to have, then in this economic climate, you're already vulnerable even before you think about putting up your prices, because people are looking to make savings. So definitely consider your pricing power. I would also do what we were talking about just a second ago, is that you're going to need to socialize these changes with your customers so that they understand them and believe them to be fair. So communication matters a lot. And then I guess the final thing is that there's a lot of opportunity to be quite sophisticated about price rises. It doesn't have to be sort of like just a standard lift across your customer base. You can do sort of private pricing on a per customer basis, but if you don't want to do that, there are other techniques as well. And usage-based pricing, which is what the tailwind for our business, what we tend to focus on, is one example of that. So let's say you're a subscription business where everybody just paid a subscription price and there was no additional fee depending on weight of usage. If you basically keep that model but introduce an allowance, there's a usage allowance associated with the subscription, and if you exceed it, you'll pay more. What you end up doing is extracting more willingness to pay from your heaviest users who believe it to be fair. And so, because the conversation you can have with them is, well, you're using it a lot, so it makes sense that you pay a little bit more than everybody else. And most people go, oh yeah, I guess that's a good point. Maybe I can think about how I could use it a little less, but I don't object to the principle that I'll be paying a little bit more. So it's worth thinking about sort of slightly stealthy tactics like that, where you can effectively price discriminate between your customers. Because that tactic there would actually, the average selling price would definitely increase. But it doesn't have to be associated with a significant headline price rise, which is something that might trigger, reconsideration of whether people want to use your product.
Sure. Okay. Makes perfect sense. Well, hey, Griff Perry, I really do appreciate your time with us today. That's all the questions I had for you for this particular discussion. Did you have any, questions or concerns for PPS or myself?
No, I mean, look, I don't have any concerns. I like talking to pricing experts. Like I said, I'm not a pricing expert myself. I just happen to work with lots of people who are, and I see all the creative and wonderful things that they're planning. And at Meta, we hope to make it easy to implement those and make them happen.
Sure, absolutely. Do you or your company have any kind of resources available for listeners that may be interested to learn more about, you or your company?
Yes, if you go to our blog, so meta.com, meta spelled with a 3, meta.com/blog, there are a bunch of resources there around it's sort of observed behavior. We're looking at pricing strategies and the impact of those pricing strategies, and we're sort of shining a light on what seems to be working and what isn't working. Like this is us looking at the outcome rather than predicting what might happen. Like I said, we're not pricing experts, but there's a bunch of stuff in there, and also included with that is a bunch of stuff about the operational challenges of implementing usage-based pricing, which people should be aware of.
Sure.
It's not easy, but it is doable if you know where you're headed.
Okay, good. Meter.com, that's M3TER.com. There's a readily available blog section for those who may be interested in learning more about Griff Perry or his company. Hey, I want to thank you again, Mr. Perry, for your time. And for our viewers, listeners tuning in today, I want to thank you all so much for your time as well. Until next time, we will see you again on the Professional Pricing Society podcast. Have a good one.